how big a break is what we've heard tonight with what went before under Joe Biden and previous US presidents? Evening.
Well, it's a huge break. It's got the town spinning here in Washington. iPhones are lighting up, telephone conversations, the Zooms are happening around town as we try to wrap our heads around this. This is certainly not "we'll do what it takes," which is what the Biden catchphrase was. It doesn't meet what the West has been doing, certainly since even 2014 when the Crimea was invaded. This is pretty much throwing in the towel, from what I can tell, and really finding that Zelensky is going to be left hanging and taken to the cleaners, as we say. This is. I don't see any way around this. We were hoping to have him in a better position to negotiate. We knew negotiations were going to be part of the process at some point, but Zelensky needed a stronger hand to play. Putin needed to feel the pain of losing on the battlefield. And we were working our way towards that. Then the election happened here in the United States, and then all of a sudden things took a real turn. So this is quite a break with what the U.S. and the West and the NATO allies, UK, what all of us have been doing. This is quite the break, and it leaves a lot of the problem in the laps of Europe, in the laps of UK.
But let's talk about that, Jim. I mean, presumably, if America just cuts off its support, which seems like the Donald Trump proposal, Europe is ultimately going to end up following suit, isn't it?
Well, that's the question, and that's the challenge for Europe, because this is existential for Europe in a lot of ways too, as we've been saying. A key question for Europe is if there is some type of peacekeeping group that goes into Ukraine. We've already taken off the table before the negotiations even start that the U.S. would be part of such a group. Now we're saying that we will not. It's going to be Europeans doing it, and it's not going to be NATO. So no Article 5 kinds of protection. So it's going to be up to Europe to provide the security guarantee. And this is not a security guarantee of peacekeepers. This has got to be a well-armed fighting force that Europe would put into Ukraine to make sure it deters any kind of future Russian adventurism with Ukraine, particularly if part of the negotiation is that the Ukraine military gets smaller or Ukraine becomes neutral. So Ukraine's not even a factor in their own defense. If it's just Europe, it's going to have to be a different kind of force than Europe has right now. And the UK, I think, is going to be a leader in this. The UK has, in Europe, UK has the leading military combat force. So this is something where it would be not just Europe having to put together that kind of force, but continue on with the efforts it's making with the rest of their military, not just those that go to Ukraine, but those that are in their home countries as well, doing their NATO work. So this will be a big effort by Europe to do this.
Jim, if I was to ask you to predict what this settlement might look like, what would you say? Because we talk a lot about what Ukraine might have to give up, land, you touched on it there, confirming it would stay neutral, giving up aspirations of joining NATO, the EU, and so on. What is Putin going to give up?
Well, that's the question, because already he has been given some concessions by the United States. We have said, and again, these aren't necessarily surprises, but we've now said officially as part of our negotiations, such as they are, that there will be no NATO for Ukraine, that there will be no NATO forces in Ukraine, that there will be no U.S. forces there. We've already laid these kinds of things out. So for Putin, my question is: so what is Putin going to give in return? What are his concessions to Zelensky? Or have we just given this stuff up front and Putin's going to pocket these concessions and then move on for more? I mean, it's a great question. I have not heard anything about what Putin will provide on his end of the bargain.
Which doesn't sound very much like a compromise or a settlement or agreement. It sounds, frankly, like Donald Trump is about to hand outright victory to Vladimir Putin on a silver platter.
Well, that's what it sounds like. Depends on how Putin defines victory, but he will certainly be better off than he is now, where he's, not in such a great place on the battlefield. You know, he's losing a major part of his army every day. It seems the casualty counts go up. But you're right. This is not something where we're gonna. This is more like cutting and running. Frankly, cutting your losses. This is more like, look, we got to end this. This isn't going well for either side. Too many people are dying. Let's stop the fighting. Let's cut our losses. And they're going to throw some pieces of paper back and forth to each other, and they will end up being a very poorly put together ceasefire. I'm not even sure, a ceasefire is not the end of the fighting. It's not a peace treaty. It's not a ceasefire just means we're not killing each other as we're trying to talk. So it could be that what Trump has in mind is he's going to work a ceasefire. He'll declare victory for himself in terms of providing a ceasefire. He'll then turn around and walk away and say to the Europeans over his shoulder, over to you. You work it out now with Putin and with Ukraine, and good luck. But we're not going to be part of it. It could be something like that.
Which sort of begs the question, Jim. You touched on it there when you talked about cutting your losses. We are talking about collectively tens of billions of pounds, dollars that have been given to Ukraine to help them avoid precisely the outcome that now seems very likely. Is that just money that's just been completely squandered at this point?
I guess the answer is yes. Well, it's not squandered. I think it was spent with the intent on getting the Zelensky and the Ukrainians to a strong part on the battlefield, a stronger hand to play in negotiations.
Sure, but
they
failed.
did the Kursk. So I think the money, and I think the humanitarian aspects of the funding from Europe and the United States was important anyway, to get the Ukrainians through the winter, to take care of the Ukrainian peoples. I mean, so there was a lot of this assistance, that went to Ukraine that was humanitarian and that was needed. But I think, going back to your question and going back to the idea of cutting your losses, I think what Trump has in mind is that he from now on is not going to do what he says Joe Biden did, which is just hand money to any Ukrainian who showed up in Washington and left a few hours later with his pocket full of money. He is now going to say, we're not going to squander our assistance. If we do provide assistance, it's going to be secured by your rare earths, your mineral deposits, other things that you produce that we like. So as far as he's concerned, we're not going to be squandering money anymore. If we're going to be providing assistance, we're going to get something for it. And so he's made it now very transactional.
And just very finally, if Putin does feel like he's won, and if the rest of the world also takes the view that Putin has won, Jim, what are the consequences of that for Putin in terms of him potentially being emboldened, but also people sort of draw links between that outcome and Xi Jinping, China, Taiwan, Iran? Talk us through the sort of ramifications of that outcome, if you would.
Well, it's a very gloomy one. I mean, you're absolutely right. The ramifications ripple into geopolitics around the world because it shows that the West, led by Trump, led by the United States, that the West, in fact, has faltered, that the West, as led by Donald Trump, is cutting its losses and trying to end this, and not necessarily on a positive note that punishes the aggressor. This is an example of where the aggressor has emerged with the prize. And the person that's going to pay is Zelensky. He'll lose his election, and Ukraine will lose territory and become a weakened nation there, and ready for a picking if it needs to be. And certainly, if you're on Taiwan and you're dealing with Trump as well, and a U.S. assistance as well, that's going to go through your mind. And if you're also part of NATO and you have depended all along on a strong United States, strong support, particularly if there's an aggressor loose on the continent, if you've been depending on that, you're going to be rather nervous tonight as well. If you're Estonia, if you're Poland, and you're thinking 3 or 4 years from now, an emboldened Russia with Trump still in the White House, are you not going to be susceptible to bullying without the backup of the United States? And the final point on this is the saving grace is going to have to be Europe. is going to have to be driving European unity on this, saying we've been dependent on the United States. We've got to break that dependency. We've got to be strong ourselves, and we're going to have to deal with this guy. If Europe cannot do that, then Europe will fall under the domination of Russia over time.
Really?
Russia
You think that's what's at stake here?
well,
The very
I'm not.
future of sort of European liberal democracy.
Well, what I mean by that is not physical occupation by Russia,
Sure, but influence.
but certainly influence. Where if Europe doesn't show strength, UK taking the lead. Also, I always point to the UK.
Jim, I'd love to see it. I fear you might be disappointed if you're banking on us to single-handedly come to Ukraine's defences, but I hope I'm wrong. I hope we do.